All right, let's welcome John Keim from ESPN. John Keim report for his weekly Friday visit. A lot of things changed this offseason. Some things kind of stay the same. Little circular motion of changes within the organization, which, John, I think you and I could both agree were foreseen. This was always going to be a transitional year. I don't know if I ever thought at the beginning of the season both Montez Sweat and Chase Young would be traded on deadline day, but that changes were coming was not a surprise. So as we sit here on Friday, like, how do you kind of like take in the week?
Yeah, I agree that before the season, there was no way I would have thought both, because what I kept hearing all offseason into the summer and early was desire to extend Montez Sweat. And so that's what I kind of been operating under. But you knew with Chase Young that it was going to be a 50-50 proposition, that some of it was going to depend on how they felt he was playing. Some of it was going to depend, and if he was adhering to the coaching they wanted him to adhere to. And then some of it was going to be, where are they at in the season? Like, are they 6-2 and first, whatever the record is, right? So when it got to 3-5, and you knew that for them, maybe it wasn't going the way they hoped, that he would be gone. But the fact that both of them are gone a couple of weeks ago would have surprised me. And then over the last week, you realize that Montez had value, and they certainly were just ready to move on from Chase. Okay,
let me. I think they're separate situations. So let me talk about. I think actually let's do Chase, because I think it's actually quite simple. He had a lot of serious injuries, and I think that is actually predominantly the big reason why, one, they didn't want to pick up the fifth-year option, and two, wanted to see how things went this year. So I actually think that it really has little to do with production and more to do that they were. I had a hard time believing that they were going to sign him to a long-term deal, even if he was having a great season this year. So I don't know.
I think had he had a great season, I think you would have seen maybe a franchise tag. Listen, the reason why people wonder about, like, oh, you only got a third for him, because teams were scared off because the medical. It's going to be, and this is one thing that I didn't say enough of, but like, it's going to be hard for him to get a multi-year deal because of that. Teams were concerned enough to trade for him that, now, of course, some teams did, but they were like, San Francisco clearly viewed him as a half-year rental. Now, if it goes well, could they keep him? Sure. But I think it would be on a one-year deal, because I think teams are concerned about that. And I don't blame them. Like, it was a brutal injury. Like, I think the production did matter in this. I mean, if he's got 10 sacks, you're not trading him, but he doesn't. And I think there was that combined with the knee situation, the long-term viability of keeping him around. And then, like, when you don't get that, then all these other little things start to, well, you know what I mean? Like, you start to hear all these other things that are attached to it, but it starts with the fact that if you're not getting the production and you know that the knee is what it is, then it's like, then it makes your decision a little bit easier. As tough as it is to move away from a guy who was a second pick, as far as like what he symbolized a few years ago, the good start he had, but that knee injury was really, really bad. And I feel bad, like it's the second time we've had a number 2 pick here who has had a brutal knee injury that altered the trajectory of his career. Yeah. And we can talk about all the other stuff that maybe bothered them about him, but if he's healthy, he's a different player. Yeah. Period.
On Montez Sweat, so let me go back to something you just said, which was during the offseason, they talked a lot about the desire to extend him.
Correct.
Why didn't that happen then?
That's a good question. And I think, so this is part of my theory. First of all, I think Josh Harris, new owner, of course, very big on analytics. You have Eugene Shen, who is coming here starting on Monday, but he's already kind of unofficially working here, right? Because he was a participant in these conversations about the trades, and not so much like, you got to trade it. It's more like, okay, why? It's part of the information gathering process. What would be the cost to extending Montez Sweat? What do the analytics say about investing X amount at one position group, meaning defensive line? Where is the money better allocated? What can you do if you have this? So I think all those questions kind of started to steer them away from extending Sweat, knowing that he might cost them $25 million per year or so. And do you want to pay that? Listen, I think Montez Sweat is a very good football player.
So do I.
I think he's good against the run. I think he's very good against the run, and I think he's improved as a pass rusher. But he is a presence on that line, and I don't think you replace him very easily. But at $25 million per, can you stomach that? So I think the analytics started to seem to shift how they wanted a roster build, and Ron Rivera would call it a paradigm shift. But I do think it starts with this new group and the emphasis on how they view roster building. And so now you have a second-round pick, you have 5 picks in the top 100, $90 million in cap space. Now maybe you can build a roster that is a little bit more balanced instead of having 4 number 1 picks. Listen, 3 of those number 1 picks were from the previous regime, but you allocated a lot of resources there. Now you have to do it elsewhere, but you also do it smartly, and that's one area that's why they're where they're at, because they haven't done it well enough. But that to me is what that signal is, a shift in how they wanted to build the roster.
Okay.
And they wouldn't. Here's the other thing. Last thing, Brandon, is they would not have traded him if they didn't get a second-round pick. So he still would have been here. And then you could have used the franchise.
Could have tagged him, right? Talked to him about paying him. Yes. Chase would have been traded. Right.
But I don't think. I don't think paying him was still on the table as much because of what I just said. That's how it feels, right? And so I don't know that. They weren't going to pay him $25 million per year. You know what I mean? I just don't think they're going to do that.
Well, but they initially if they were going to offer him a market deal, that's what they talked about wanting to do. I don't know that he did.
Different groups in charge. Different groups in charge.
Well, that's what gets to this point, which is who's making the decisions.
I think clearly there's a desire to say, okay, this is how you do it. Now, I don't think that Josh Harris goes to them and say, you can't keep Montez. I think it's what is the value in this player? Because Josh Harris is not Dan Snyder. He's not going there. What he wants you to do is bring him answers. So he asks questions, you bring him answers. But then you have Eugene Shen, again, who is he's analytics, and it's roster building analytics. So that means where you allocate resources, what positions do you pay, what's the value for a guy of someone like Montez Sweat. That's where that comes. So in the offseason, this wasn't a factor. This guy wasn't here. Harris hadn't been a big part of things at that point. And I don't this is partly a theory, but I do think it's I do think that there's a lot of what I'm saying is very accurate too. That I just think, because again, he kept calling it a paradigm shift. And I think it's as much about all of that versus, because I don't, again, in the offseason when I'm hearing that, it's how they had been doing it, not how they were going to do it.
Right. When he says, he said paradigm shift a lot. What does that mean? What are we talking about? What does that mean?
I think that means that you're, instead of just putting all your, because at one point, again, it's we can keep all 4 guys together because we have a rookie quarterback contract.
Right.
Well, now, right. But the shift is, yes, you can, but is that the best way to use your resources? The answer clearly to this group is no. So the paradigm shift is now you can invest more in your offensive line, which I think everybody would agree is an absolute need. Now you can maybe go out and get a higher priced linebacker or corner. Okereke, the guy from New York, is a guy that they liked. He was $13 million. You could not do that last year because they couldn't afford that. This year, if a guy like that's there, now you can. Now you build a little bit more of a complete roster, which is what they haven't done. And maybe they thought they had, but they haven't. And so, that's what I think he's meaning by that, just building the roster a little bit more balanced.
Yeah, because this all goes back to
here's Brad, not to cut you off.
Go ahead.
The defensive line had not produced. This
I
group
agree.
Has lost 5 or 6 games.
Well,
it's not like we're not breaking up Aaron Donald in this group. I mean, and I know it's not all on them, period. But as a group, they hadn't done enough.
I agree with that. Other than, everyone, just to be fair to them, sacks and pressures, they're top 10 in the league. They're not terrible. But the big plays and all the yardage, all that, I'm with you. I don't think they've played. The story of the season's the defense, and honestly, But to sit there and say like those four guys collectively have been bad, I think is actually I don't think it's really that's not fair to them.
I didn't say bad. I said as a group, as individually they can be very good. As a group, they have not gotten it done. I don't think it's hard to argue that. Now, as a group, like for individually, Chase Young is like top 5 or 6 in terms of pass rush win rate. None of these other guys are top 55.
Right.
Montez Sweat was pretty low. So, like, it is. That's why I say that as a group, they haven't played as well together the way that you had hoped that they could dominate games. Now, you're right. There are definitely some games where it's like that. And I also think there's some games where they didn't do anything. You go back and watch, like, they were better than people thought.
Yes.
It's just that quarterback X got rid of the ball fast, and so therefore you didn't see it. But, like, they stopped, against DeAndre Swift, they really did a good job in both games of stopping the run. But I think some of it too, but again, like it hasn't, investing heavily in them has not gotten them where they need to go. And it's not, and here's the other problem, Brandon, this isn't the fault of the defensive line that they've screwed up the offensive line. It's not their fault.
Right.
They've made decisions prior to this that just have not worked. I mean, it's not like they said, oh, we can't do it because of this. They've just botched it. So it's not just because of that. Like, it's not just like, oh, now they got rid of these guys. Now there's a magic wand. It's going to be great. I don't believe that. They still have work to do, but I just think this is why they went there. I think of the two, the hardest one for them to give up was Sweat.
Yeah, of course. That's not even a question for a lot of reasons. I know Chase Young's got a big name and he's a number 2 overall pick and he's a very famous player, but like for a lot of reasons that we've already described and some that I haven't, they had to move on, and that's unfortunate reality. Sweat, I can be swayed one way or the other. If you kept him,
hard one to get
sure. Like he's a very talented player. He's a very good player. Is he a great player? I don't know. But he's a very talented player, so I could be swayed either way on him. But I want to go back to the paradigm shift thing because Eugene Shed's been here a week. There's nobody that I know of that's a GM here right now other than Ron Rivera. So when Rivera talks about a paradigm shift, whose paradigm is it?
Well, I think it's a different way of looking at things. I mean, this is how Josh Harris wants his organizations run. And so
run by who? Who's behind the curtain? Who's the wizard, John? Who's behind the curtain?
Bram. Yeah. Josh Harris is the owner. This is how he wants it run.
But I don't know. He's not picking the players. There's no way. There's no way that he is saying, I want to see the draft value chart. I don't believe that.
That's not what I said. But he is setting the tone for how you build this is how I want the organization run. Now you guys go do it. So then it comes down to bringing a guy like Eugene Shen, who has experience in the NFL and has helped do this for other teams, Jacksonville included. And I think it was Tampa Bay. I can't remember who the other one was.
Miami.
So that Miami was.
Miami, Baltimore, and Jacksonville is where he's been.
Right. Yeah. Thank you. That's right. Right. So it's like, this is the vision I have. Who can carry it out for me? And then you bring these guys in. They've had a number of discussions about this. I also think, and not just, I'm not going to put this on like, oh, it's Eugene Shen's thing. I don't know that. I also know that Ron Rivera and Josh Harris have had numerous conversations. And it's very possible that throughout those, they kind of came to this conclusion, like, it's not working like this. We need to go this way.
Yeah.
And you need to protect it. So I think that's also a part of it as well. It's not just like Josh Harris coming in saying, I don't like defensive linemen. You got to build this. Josh Harris also can see what we all see. And so then it becomes, okay, if I'm Josh Harris, I'm going to go around, okay, this is what I see us needing. How do you assess it? Why do you think it would be smart to do this? Why would we not do that? And not so much saying, like the previous owner would have told them, we got to go get this guy. And he would have spent $35 million on whatever junky offensive lineman was available. And, but I think in this case, it's more asking questions and coming to a conclusion based off of the information you have and how you can answer those questions. So, because I think but I have a feeling too that part of this is just throughout these conversations you start to realize, and then I also think that these guys realized, again, it wasn't leading them to where they need to go. Like you can have, and Ron Rivera talked about too when he was in Carolina, that his defenses there were a lot built on the interior, and this is where they fall short because it wasn't just the D tackles. He also had Luke Kuechly, and they don't have Luke Kuechly here, but they have the tackles. And so can you build out a little bit better because now you have more resources spent elsewhere, and then can you use the ends to basically set up the tackles? So I just think it's probably a number of conversations have been held to get this point. It certainly is absolutely a shift in their roster building strategy. Whether it works or not, we'll see. But that's where I think that's my reason.
I mean, I guess my point is this. This is like, I think we're in the early beginning part of the transitional process of who's ultimately going to be making these decisions. But when they're happening in real time, especially when it involves prominent players like this, I kind of want to know who's pulling the strings and the reasons behind it. And I don't know that we know that or will know that. I mean, that's what I'm saying, right?
And I think, so like and this is like a number of people described it to me. It's like, it's Mayhew and Marty Herney going out and soliciting offers, bringing it to Ron and then Eugene Shen. And then as a group, they're talking with Josh Harris. And then you're coming to a decision. Now, who ultimately says do this? I think it's like, what's the best football move? Is this good value? And that's where a guy who has a deep analytic knowledge of the NFL and of roster building comes into play.
Listen, I'll hear that. They're going to have a top 40 pick for a guy who might have a similar output than the guy making $26 million a year. I will hear that. Like I'm not against it. I just think like it's just so I don't need to spell it out. Like I don't know what's going on, and I think that's the whole thing. I don't know what's going on right now.
Well, here's the other part. We know of that group, 2 people will be here next year for sure, and that's Eugene Shen and Josh Harris.
Correct. And that's the bottom line. Like when you're making decisions like this, it does beg the question of who wanted to make those decisions, because even as you admitted, and I know, they wanted to re-sign Montez Sweat. As of a couple months ago, they wanted it, but they didn't have the authorization to do it. And I understood why, but suddenly that's changed. And frankly, Sweat's been no different on the field than he has been in the first 4 years, which is what makes this decision very interesting that it happened.
Oh, yeah. Well, like I said, Eugene Shen and Josh Harris will be here for sure next year. Now, the other part of it, too, is, and it's funny because you'd hear people like, oh, well, if these guys do this, it makes it hard for them to keep their jobs. I think it does the opposite, because if Josh Harris finds out later we could have had a 2 for him, why didn't you do that? Well, we wanted to win, but that's not the best move for the franchise. And so if now you make what they considered a good football move, now if you win, you have a better chance because you actually handle the process better. I don't know that that's going to happen. It's just that I think because if you're Josh Harris, you have to. My understanding is, he really liked how this process unfolded and how it was handled. But there was I know that there was a lot of discussions with the Marty Herney and Mayhew with Harris, and just a lot of questions asked. That's how he operates.
Yeah. The other thing I wanted to address with all of this in the middle of the week was when Rivera first addressed the Sweat trade. They'd both happened, but he couldn't address the Young trade until today because it wasn't finalized.
Right.
But he addressed the Sweat trade, but we were all working on the assumption this happened. And when he was asked about it, he immediately turned to, we're developing a young quarterback, which
right.
I was like, what does one have to do with the other? I was confused. So what did you make of that?
I think I make of it that a lot of you can make a few things of it. Could it be deflection? Like, hey, we this organization, because he said it a few times. He said it again today. This organization has looked for a quarterback for a long time. We think we may have one. And I think part of that is.
I agree.
Yeah, no, I agree.
Yeah.
I agree with him. But I think it's like kind of like, hey, don't look over here. Look over here. Don't look at 3 and 5. Don't look at this. Look over here. We got this quarterback. And to a degree, like if they walk away with that, like they have their guy, it's a lot more, regardless of who's next year, you have something to build on because of that. So I think that's part of it too. It's just, but yeah, you're right. Like it doesn't, if you would re-sign Montez Sweat, you still have that young quarterback. So
right.
It wasn't a 1-for-1 here. It was I think some of it too is I'm sure he knows that like people are going to look at it a certain way, and he wants people to remind them that we're trying to develop the CM quarterback. We have this guy. That's where we're doing something here. However, again, one doesn't necessarily have anything to do with the other. And now if you say, Now, if you had said, like, after the season, we want to invest around him, and this gives us more ability to do that because we think we have that guy, I think he kind of said that at one point, but that's where it's like, oh, okay, you got more picks to help the offensive line, and you can get a tight end out of that too, and you have $90 million in cap space. You can do this and help, so you can build that offense a little bit quicker. Now, of course, you also now need defensive ends.
Yep. You do, you're like, I mean, all the people who say like, oh, they might be, more collectively better in the short term. Sure. But you win with talent. And I like Casey Tuileana. I like James Smith-Williams. They're not Montez Sweat. They're not of that caliber, right? Like, so over 17 games, it's different. All right. Very different. It's like, he's a talented guy. So that's why I'm 50-50 on it. I knew Chase had to go, unfortunately. All right, let me ask this last thing.
I'm the same with you on Montez too.
Yeah. I could be persuaded either way. I think they got good value. I think they got good value for him. I do. That said, I could make a case to keep him because he's a very good player.
I'm with you.
Yeah.
I'm with you 100%.
Okay. All right. I don't know if I'm sure you have thought about this a little bit, and maybe you'll have to write this for ESPN.com at some point. But like, all we've talked about for 4 years is these 4 first-round draft picks and this group collectively taking this team to different places, and it did not happen, and it's officially over this week.
Correct.
How do you kind of think through what's been an era of that's the group that's going to make this team go, and it never got them over 500?
I mean, I've covered this team a long time. I'm kind of used to that. This group was different, though, because it wasn't just big names. It was like talented guys. I mean, Payne and Allen have made Pro Bowls. Chase Young was a defensive rookie of the year, and Montez Sweat was a legit, starting end and a very good end. So I think to me, it's just disappointing that it never. And it's funny, Bram, because to be honest, like last year, I mean, they were top 10 in both yards and points. Chase didn't play much. And then the year before, in 2021, they had 6 games where they didn't play. They didn't have Sweat and Young on the field. One or both were missing. No, both. Neither one were on the field. There were 6 games. They went 4-2 and played really good ball. And I'm not saying it was just because of them out. I'm not saying that, but the numbers are what they are. And to me, that's what's disappointing is that they never got to there where it's like, and you're right, like there were really good games they had. And there were a lot of good moments that they had. And there are plays that Chase made that no one else can make, et cetera. But it's just unfortunate for them that it never went where they thought. And like this was the year. Like this year, like the defense stinks. And it's not because the defensive line, that line wasn't getting it done, but the secondary has been bad. I mean, and the linebackers need to be better. And we know that. So that's where, but they were supposed to be led by the line, and you can't say that it was. And it just, I think the line fought a lot of things for a while because with Sam Mills, they just did not like the coaching. They didn't like the style of what they were being asked to do for a while, and I think they still sometimes fight it. And that to me is an issue too. And so, I think that it's very disappointing how it unfolded because there's a lot of the talent there, and it could have been really, really good.
I know your editors make you make a pick. Did you pick them to win this week?
Well, they don't make me make a pick anymore. I foolishly do it on my own.
Oh.
So I did because I don't know why sometimes I do, but I did this week, but I do think for a couple of reasons. One, you watch New England, like they have their own issues, and Mac Jones, like, I mean, if he throws it more than 7 yards downfield, it'll be a shock.
Yep.
But it's it's like how does Bill Belichick what does Howell do against that D, and if you can do X, if you can protect him, he'll be fine. Can they do it? So I did pick them. I figure they got another win in them. Like after a week like this, it's the kind of game they seem to go win. And then it's like, oh, they did all right without these guys. And then you go to Seattle, and we'll see what happens.
All right. I'll see you up in Foxborough. Right. Thank you, John. I appreciate it.
Thanks.